On the night of July 2, 1947, something fell from the sky over the desert of New Mexico. Whatever it was, it came down hard, scattering debris across an enormous area of ranch land approximately 75 miles north of the city of Roswell. A rancher named Mac Brazel discovered the wreckage the following morning while checking on his sheep after a violent thunderstorm. What he found scattered across his property was unlike anything he had ever seen: strange metallic fragments, unusual foil-like material that could not be bent or burned, thin beams with strange markings along their length, and a black rubbery substance that covered large sections of the debris field. Brazel gathered some of the material, brought it to the local sheriff, and the sheriff called the military. What happened next set off a chain of events that has never been satisfactorily explained, a cover-up so extensive and so poorly managed that it created more questions than it answered, and a mystery that has defined humanity's relationship with the possibility of extraterrestrial life for nearly 8 decades. The United States Army Air Force Base at Roswell was the most elite military installation in the world in 1947. It was home to the 509th Bomb Group, the only unit in existence that had ever dropped nuclear weapons in combat. When the base received the report about the debris field on Mac Brazel's ranch, they responded immediately. A team of intelligence officers and military personnel was dispatched to the site. The debris was collected and transported to the base, and the ranch was cordoned off. On July 8, 1947, the public affairs officer at Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release that stunned the world. The United States military had, according to the press release, recovered a flying disc. The story was picked up by newspapers across the country and around the world within hours. For one brief moment, the United States government appeared to be confirming that a craft of unknown origin had crashed in the New Mexico desert. Within hours of that press release, the story changed completely. Senior military officials held a press conference in Fort Worth, Texas, where Brigadier General Roger Ramey stood next to debris scattered on the floor and announced that what had been recovered at Roswell was not a flying disc at all. It was a weather balloon. The newspapers that had run the flying disc story were forced to retract. The military declared the matter closed. And the story of the Roswell crash was largely forgotten for the next 30 years. Then, in the late 1970s, researchers and journalists began tracking down witnesses who had been present at Roswell in 1947, military personnel, civilians, medical staff, and local residents who had seen things that contradicted the official weather balloon story. What they found was extraordinary. Dozens of witnesses, many of them aging military veterans who had nothing to gain from coming forward, described seeing materials and objects that were inconsistent with any weather balloon. They described non-human bodies. They described being threatened by military officers who told them that if they ever spoke about what they had seen, they and their families would face serious consequences. They described a level of secrecy and intimidation that went far beyond anything that would be necessary to protect a weather balloon program. One of the most significant witnesses was a mortician named Glenn Dennis, who worked at a funeral home in Roswell that had a contract with the military base. Dennis claimed that in the days following the crash, he received calls from the base mortuary officer asking about the availability of small hermetically sealed caskets and inquiring about the preservation of bodies that had been exposed to desert conditions. He was then called to the base itself, where he claimed to be ushered out by military personnel and warned never to discuss what he had seen. Dennis later described a nurse at the base who told him she had assisted in the examination of non-human bodies recovered from the crash site, bodies that were small, had large heads, and were unlike anything she had ever seen. The nurse disappeared from the base shortly after their conversation, and Dennis claimed he was never able to locate her again. Major Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer at Roswell who was first sent to examine the debris on Mac Brazel's ranch. In 1978, Marcel spoke publicly for the first time about what he had seen. He said unequivocally that the material he recovered from the ranch was not a weather balloon, not any conventional aircraft, and not any material he had ever encountered in his military career. He described foil that could be crumpled and would return perfectly to its original shape without any crease. He described beams that were incredibly strong and lightweight, covered in markings that resembled hieroglyphics. He described his absolute certainty that whatever had crashed in that desert had not been made on Earth. The official explanation changed again in 1994, when the United States Air Force released a report stating that what had crashed at Roswell was not a weather balloon but a classified surveillance balloon from a top-secret program called Project Mogul, designed to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. This explanation accounted for the unusual materials and the extreme secrecy, but it did not account for the witness reports of non-human bodies. In 1997, the Air Force released a follow-up report addressing the body question, suggesting that witnesses had confused the crash dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests with alien bodies. Critics immediately noted that the crash dummy tests did not begin until 1953, 6 years after the Roswell incident, making it impossible for witnesses to have confused them with something they had seen in 1947. The physical evidence that has emerged over the decades has been inconclusive but intriguing. A rancher found unusual material on his property near the debris field that was analyzed and found to contain isotopic ratios inconsistent with naturally occurring Earth materials. Soil samples from the debris field site showed anomalous readings that could not be fully explained. And in 2021, former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe stated publicly that the United States government has evidence of objects in its possession that demonstrate technologies that we don't have and that we don't have the ability to replicate. The question of what happened at Roswell in July of 1947 has never been officially resolved. The United States government has changed its explanation 3 times. Dozens of credible witnesses have described things that contradict every official account. The physical evidence, while fragmentary, points to something unusual. And the extreme level of military response and secrecy that descended on a small New Mexico town over what the government claimed was a weather balloon has never been satisfactorily explained. Something came down in the desert outside Roswell on the night of July 2, 1947. The United States government knows what it was. They have not told us. And in the nearly 80 years since that night, every attempt to force an answer has been met with classification, deflection, and stories that keep changing in ways that only deepen the mystery. Subscribe to Lost Chronicle, and every week we will take you deeper into the cases that history could not explain.